The study of justice often begins not in thick textbooks, but in the rapid, uncomfortable machinery of our own moral intuitions. When we are confronted with the classic trolley problem, we are not merely playing a theoretical game, we are forced to grapple with the raw mechanics of valuation. In the heat of the moment, the human mind tends to default toward the most straightforward arithmetic of survival. We see the tracks, the impending disaster, and the stark reality of loss. The majority of us, when pressed, gravitate toward a consequentialist framework. We intuitively feel that the preservation of 5 lives is objectively superior to the preservation of 1. This is not necessarily because we are cold or calculating, but because we are programmed to minimize total suffering. It is a logic of efficiency applied to the most inefficient of all things, human tragedy. When we argue that it is better for 1 to die so that 5 may live, we are echoing a deeply ingrained societal value that prioritizes the aggregate good over the individual. This consequentialist impulse, however, is not a static rule. It is a fluid reaction to crisis. We see this in how society memorializes those who make split-second decisions to sacrifice a few to save many. There is a profound psychological comfort in believing that, when everything is lost, there is still a right mathematical answer. Yet as soon as we remove the distance of the trolley and introduce the intimacy of the bridge, our certainty begins to fracture. The moment we move from pulling a lever to physically pushing a human being, the abstraction evaporates. The act of causing harm becomes tangible. We are forced to ask whether the outcome justifies the method. The shift from steering a trolley to committing an act of direct physical force highlights the tension between what we believe is correct in theory and what we feel is moral in practice. This internal friction is the starting point of genuine philosophical inquiry, where our instincts are challenged by the reality of our own agency. The bridge scenario introduces a layer of horror that the track switch lacks, because it forces the participant to become an active executioner. In the first instance, the driver feels like a facilitator of a lesser evil. In the second, the onlooker feels like a murderer. This distinction is vital because it reveals that human morality is not purely about the end result. We are deeply concerned with the nature of the act itself. If we were purely robots governed by consequentialism, the choice on the bridge would be identical to the choice on the track. The fact that the vast majority of people refuse to push the man off the bridge proves that we hold on to a belief in categorical duties, that there are some lines that simply cannot be crossed, regardless of the potential for a better outcome. This conflict between the head and the heart defines the human condition. We want the best outcome for the group, but we are terrified of the price of admission if that price involves violating our deepest moral taboos. When we move the discussion into the medical field, the stakes only rise. The doctor in the emergency room is presented with a situation that feels like a medical necessity, a triage decision that is universally accepted. We allow the doctor to prioritize the 5 who can be saved over the 1 who will perish because the goal is healing, not harm. But the organ transplant case is the mirror image of the bridge scenario. It is the logical conclusion of extreme consequentialism. If we can save 5, why should we let them die? Yet the idea of sacrificing a healthy person for their organs is universally abhorrent. It triggers a visceral sense of injustice because it treats a human being as a mere means to an end, rather than an end in themselves. This is the crux of the debate between utilitarianism and deontological ethics. We are caught between a world that demands we calculate value to survive, and a world that demands we respect the inherent dignity of every single life. The reaction of the student who suggested taking organs from one of the 5 patients is perhaps the most human response of all. It is a desperate, clever attempt to resolve the paradox by finding a third way, a way to satisfy the math without violating the moral constraint. While the instructor notes that this wrecks the philosophical point, it actually highlights something far more important, the human refusal to accept a false dilemma. We don't want to choose between evil outcomes. We want to find a solution that preserves both the group and the individual. But philosophy is not about finding the easy way out. It is about staying with the discomfort. It is about recognizing that in a world of limited resources and infinite moral gravity, we are sometimes forced into positions where no outcome is truly clean. Understanding this is the first step toward moving from a passive observer of ethics to an active, conscious citizen who understands the weight of every choice. We often think of moral principles as something we are taught by authority figures or institutions. Yet, the trolley problem demonstrates that morality is something we already live. We walk around with a dormant set of rules that only wake up when a situation becomes strain. The power of these thought experiments lies in their ability to make the familiar feel alien. By taking a simple train wreck and turning it into a question of personal agency, we begin to see that our moral compass is not a fixed needle. It shifts depending on the proximity of the harm. We are much more comfortable with impersonal, systemic harm than we are with intimate hand-to-hand violence. This is a crucial observation for any student of human behavior. We are not just logical calculators. We are emotional beings who project our own conscience onto the mechanical world. The distinction between the doctor saving 5 patients and the surgeon harvesting organs from one is where the consequentialist argument hits a wall. If the outcome is the only thing that matters, why does the surgery feel so wrong? The answer is that we view humans as having a sacred status that cannot be traded for numbers. This is the foundation of what we call individual rights. If we allowed ourselves to use people as spare parts, the social contract would dissolve entirely. We accept the doctor choosing to save the 5 because it is a preservation of life, not a violation of an innocent person's bodily integrity. The utility here is not just in the number of lives saved, but in the maintenance of a society where people are not afraid to walk into a hospital for a checkup. When we examine these cases, we start to see that our morality is a constant negotiation. We aren't just trying to solve a puzzle, we are trying to define the boundaries of our own integrity. What does it mean to be a good person? Is it someone who follows the rules no matter the outcome? Or is it someone who is willing to break the rules to achieve a greater good? This is not just a question for philosophy classrooms, it is a question for politicians, soldiers, and business leaders. Every day, someone somewhere is deciding who gets resources and who goes without. By exploring these dilemmas, we aren't just talking about trolley cars, we are talking about the hidden, often painful choices that sustain our world. The skepticism that the instructor warns about, the idea that because we can't solve these problems we shouldn't try, is perhaps the greatest danger to functioning society. It is easy to say, everything is subjective, or everyone has their own truth. While that might be a comfortable resting place for our minds, it is a poor foundation for law or policy. If we surrender to skepticism, we lose the ability to argue for what is right. We become paralyzed by the sheer difficulty of the task. Kant was right to call skepticism a resting place rather than a dwelling place. It is where we go to catch our breath, but it is not where we can live if we want to build a just and coherent society. The role of the restlessness of reason is to ensure that we never become complacent. We are forced to constantly test our principles against new, often terrifying scenarios. If a principle works for a train wreck, does it hold up for a pandemic? Does it hold up for global climate policy? The challenge of philosophy is to create a set of values that can survive the collision with reality. It is a messy, unending process. It requires us to be humble enough to admit we might be wrong, but bold enough to advocate for a vision of the world that is actually worth living in. This is what it means to be a thinking participant in a democracy. The historical context of these ideas, from Bentham to Kant, is not just dusty academic history. It is the history of how we have tried to organize human existence. Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, gave us a powerful tool to demand accountability. If a law doesn't make people happier or healthier, why do we have it? That is a revolutionary and at times dangerous question. It forces us to measure the success of a civilization by the tangible well-being of its citizens. But as we've seen, it also risks ignoring the individual. It risks turning a human life into a digit in an equation. That is why we need the balance of the categorical approach. Immanuel Kant, on the other hand, reminds us that we are more than just bags of utility. We are subjects with dignity. He teaches that we should never treat people merely as a means to an end. This is a profound check on the power of the majority. If we truly follow Kant, we must respect the individual even when it seems mathematically irrational to do so. This creates a tension that is essential for progress. If we were pure utilitarians, we might be more efficient, but we would also likely be more ruthless. By forcing these two philosophies into conversation, we create the friction that allows us to find a middle ground, a way to pursue the greater good without sacrificing our essential humanity. The risk mentioned in the lecture, that philosophy might make you a worse citizen, is fascinating. It implies that being a good citizen often requires a certain amount of unthinking obedience to convention. Philosophy peels back those conventions and asks, why? When you start asking why, you stop being the perfect cog in the machine. You start questioning authority, you start questioning the status quo, and you start seeing the contradictions in your own community. That is undeniably disruptive. But is it bad, or is it the necessary precursor to a more mature form of patriotism, one that is based on true understanding rather than blind adherence? When we look at the case of the lifeboat, or the struggle to survive after 19 days of starvation, the morality changes again. We shift from a legal or medical framework to one of pure desperation. Does the do what you have to do logic hold up under extreme duress? We often judge these cases with leniency because we recognize the frailty of our own moral compass when the stakes are absolute survival. This brings us back to the idea that context is everything. Morality is not just a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. It is a dynamic response to the conditions of our existence, and acknowledging this is a sign of intellectual maturity. Throughout this journey, the goal is to develop a moral habit. We aren't just learning to solve riddles, we are learning how to inhabit our own lives with greater awareness. We are learning how to look at a news headline or a political speech and see the underlying principles that are being invoked. Are they appealing to the aggregate good? Are they appealing to an absolute right? By stripping away the layers of rhetoric, we become better at judging the decisions that affect our communities. This is the essence of a liberal education, not the accumulation of facts, but the cultivation of a refined, discerning, and ultimately restless mind. Consider how our digital age affects this. We are constantly bombarded with trolley problems, from algorithmic decisions in self-driving cars to the triage of social media content. Who gets to decide what is better, the machine or the human? The arguments made in the lecture hall in the 18th century are more relevant today than ever before because the scale of our decisions has exploded. We are no longer just choosing tracks for a trolley, we are choosing the path for global infrastructures that affect millions. If we don't have a solid grasp of these moral frameworks, we are essentially letting algorithms do the thinking for us. To be unsettled by philosophy is a good thing. It means you are still growing. It means you are still engaging with the world in a way that allows for change. If you feel comfortable in your moral views, you're probably not looking hard enough at the difficult cases. The goal of this documentary-style analysis is to help you see that discomfort as an opportunity. It is a signal that you are confronting a complex truth about human nature. The more you sit with this discomfort, the more you realize that justice is not something that is finished or finalized. It is something that we build together, piece by piece, argument by argument. As we progress through these discussions, remember that the goal is not to find a correct answer that wins an argument. The goal is to participate in the conversation in a way that acknowledges the validity of the competing claims. That is the very definition of a pluralistic society. We have to live with people who disagree with us on the fundamental nature of justice. If we can't understand the logic behind their disagreement, we can't hope to find a way to live alongside them. Philosophy teaches us to listen to the other not as an opponent to be defeated, but as a fellow participant in a shared human problem. Think about the way the audience in the lecture hall reacted. They laughed, they clapped, they hesitated, they challenged the professor. This was not a lecture in the traditional sense, it was a performance. It was a mirror held up to the class. We should strive to replicate that level of engagement in our own thinking. We should not consume information passively, we should question it, challenge it, and test it against our own experience. We are not just vessels for information, we are active creators of our own moral universe. Ultimately, the lessons we take from these trolley problems will determine the kind of society we leave behind. If we prioritize only the aggregate, we lose our humanity. If we prioritize only the absolute, we may fail to survive our greatest challenges. The truth lies in the tension, in the constant navigation between these two poles. By accepting that this is an unavoidable, eternal struggle, we empower ourselves to be more intentional, more compassionate, and more effective in our pursuit of justice. The story is indeed about you, and it is a story that continues to write itself every single day. Moving forward into the complexities of human conduct, we must acknowledge that our moral landscape is often dictated by our capacity for empathy. When we imagine ourselves as the driver of the trolley or the surgeon in the hospital, we are not just solving a puzzle, we are engaging in a simulation of character. This shift from third-person analysis to first-person identification is where the true weight of ethics is felt. It is one thing to discuss the abstract fairness of sacrificing one life for five, but it is entirely another to place yourself in the shoes of the person being asked to make that choice. We find that our moral principles often buckle under the pressure of personal stakes, revealing a fundamental truth about human psychology. We are inherently biased towards our own sense of moral purity, even when the outcome demands otherwise. This brings us to the core of why these debates are so uncomfortable. We like to think of ourselves as consistent, rational actors who operate based on firm principles. We want to believe that if we have a rule, we follow it regardless of the circumstances. However, the scenarios presented reveal that our internal rules are often contradictory. We hold two incompatible beliefs simultaneously: that the greatest good for the greatest number is the ultimate goal, and that certain individual rights are inviolable. This is not a failure of logic, it is a feature of being human. We live in the tension between these two poles, and we often find ourselves improvising our morality on the fly to suit the specific, and often desperate, needs of the moment. Consider the concept of the active agent versus the passive observer. When we push the fat man from the bridge, we are performing an act that is undeniably and physically violent. There is a visceral revulsion to this, which suggests that our morality is not just governed by reason, but also by our biological aversion to causing direct harm. This physical, or perhaps evolutionary, response to violence acts as a natural check on purely utilitarian calculations. If we were truly utilitarian, the difference between turning a steering wheel to kill one person and pushing a person with our hands would be negligible. The fact that the physical act feels so much more immoral indicates that our ethical framework is deeply rooted in our bodily existence and our sense of agency. This, in turn, changes how we view justice in a broader societal sense. If our morality is so deeply tied to the directness of our actions, then our legal and political systems must be designed to reflect that. We often struggle to hold corporations or governments accountable because their actions are frequently systemic and detached from the immediate visible harm they cause. The trolley problem serves as an excellent metaphor for the modern world. We are all, in a sense, standing on a bridge witnessing systemic problems that hurt many, yet we feel powerless or unwilling to become the active agent who intervenes. This creates a paralysis in our public life where we know something is wrong, but we refuse to take the specific actions that would be required to fix it. The challenge of moving from an observer to an active participant is the central theme of political philosophy. To act in the public square is to risk being wrong. It is to risk making a choice that hurts someone else. This is why many people prefer to remain in the realm of skepticism, as it acts as a protective shield against the burden of responsibility. By claiming that no one can ever truly know the right answer, we excuse ourselves from the requirement to try. However, as the instructor points out, this is a dangerous evasion. If we do not make a choice, the trolley continues on its path and the harm is still done. Choosing not to act is, in itself, a choice with significant consequences. As we explore the works of thinkers like Aristotle and John Locke, we begin to see that these questions about the trolley car are simply ancient problems in modern dress. The struggle to balance individual liberty with the common good is the foundational debate of all democratic societies. It is the core of our political disputes over taxes, healthcare, and civil rights. The beauty of these philosophical texts is not that they provide a manual for living, but that they force us to articulate the values we are already using to navigate the world. By articulating these values, we make them accessible to debate and, more importantly, to improvement. The role of the restless reason becomes even more critical when we realize that our personal moral code is often shaped by the culture we inhabit. We are the products of our society, our upbringing, and our lived experiences. When we encounter someone whose moral reasoning is drastically different from our own, it is tempting to dismiss them as wrong or irrational. But philosophy teaches us that their position is likely built on a different, but equally valid, set of initial premises. To engage with them is to test our own foundation, which is the only way to avoid becoming intellectually stagnant. Let's look at the idea of sacrifice. In many cultures, the act of self-sacrifice is the highest moral good. We see this in the stories of heroes who give their lives to save others. But what about the involuntary sacrifice? When someone is forced to die so that others may live, we call it a tragedy or in extreme cases a crime. The distinction between a martyr and a victim is one of the most fragile concepts in human ethics. It is determined entirely by consent and purpose. This is why the organ transplant case is so offensive. It treats a human being as a victim whose life is stolen, rather than a martyr whose life is offered. This is why the human touch in our discussions is so essential. If we reduce everything to data, we lose the nuance of human experience. Philosophy is the language of that nuance. It is the attempt to put into words the things we feel deeply but struggle to explain. When we talk about justice, we aren't talking about a mathematical constant. We are talking about an aspiration. We are talking about a world we want to build, one where every action is measured not just for its efficiency, but for its impact on the dignity of the people involved. In the coming segments of this exploration, we will continue to apply these frameworks to real-world controversies. From the debate over affirmative action to the complexities of free speech, we will see how these abstract principles manifest in the lives of real people. The goal remains the same: to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar so that we can see our own choices with new eyes. We are not just debating hypotheticals, we are preparing to live in a world that is increasingly complex and requires a more nuanced approach to moral decision-making. As we reflect on our previous discussions, we might notice a shift in our own thinking. Perhaps you are more comfortable with the consequentialist approach than you were at the beginning, or perhaps you have become more protective of individual rights. This movement is the proof that the restlessness of reason is working. You are not the same person you were at the start of this journey. This is the personal reward of philosophy. It changes who you are by forcing you to take ownership of your beliefs. You can no longer rely on borrowed opinions. You must craft your own based on a deeper understanding of the trade-offs involved. What about the fat man scenario again? Is there a way to view it that doesn't just lead to murder? Some might argue that if we were all in a state of absolute necessity, we would have to accept a certain level of collective sacrifice. This is the lifeboat ethics model. It suggests that in truly extreme situations, our conventional morality is suspended. While this is a frightening thought, it is a reality that history has forced upon many. It challenges us to consider where our limits are and whether those limits are truly universal or just a luxury of times of peace. We must also consider the role of institutional trust. If we allow doctors to perform organ harvesting for the sake of the many, we destroy the trust that is required for the medical system to function. This is a classic utilitarian argument. Even if one sacrifice saves five, the negative consequences for society as a whole are so great that the act itself becomes irrational from a utilitarian perspective. This shows that utilitarianism is not just about the immediate result, it is about the long-term impact on the system. A society that fears its leaders is a society that cannot function. This brings us back to the idea of the social contract. We agree to follow certain rules because it benefits us all in the long run. We agree not to kill, not to steal, and to respect the rights of others even when it might be inconvenient because we want to live in a world where we are also protected. If we start making exceptions for the greater good, we weaken the foundation of that contract. This is why categorical moral reasoning is so vital. It provides the rigid, non-negotiable boundaries that make the social contract possible. The tension between these two modes of reasoning is not something we should ever hope to resolve. Instead, it is something we should learn to manage. We need the consequentialist to remind us of the reality of our choices and to demand that we strive for better outcomes. We need the categorical thinker to remind us of the boundaries of human dignity and to protect us from the dangers of unchecked efficiency. A balanced society is one that is constantly debating both, acknowledging the necessity of both, and refusing to succumb to the temptation of choosing just one. As we continue to dive into these topics, we should focus on the quality of our questions rather than the certainty of our answers. The most important part of any philosophical inquiry is the admission that we don't have all the answers. This is the definition of intellectual humility. It allows us to keep learning, to keep growing, and to keep engaging with the world in a way that is open and constructive. If we approach these debates with the goal of winning, we have already lost the essence of philosophy. Consider the influence of media and the way we consume information today. We are often presented with stories designed to trigger our immediate moral reaction, bypassing our critical faculties. We are told who the hero is and who the villain is, and we are expected to take sides without any reflection. This is the opposite of philosophical inquiry. It is designed to shut down the restlessness of reason by providing us with a simple, pre-packaged moral narrative. We must be wary of this. We must strive to look past the surface and ask the difficult questions that the media ignores. The way we talk about these issues with each other is also a reflection of our moral development. Can we disagree without being disagreeable? Can we respect the humanity of someone who holds a completely different set of principles? This is the ultimate test of our philosophy. If we can't maintain our connection to others while engaging in deep disagreement, we have failed the task of citizenship. The goal is to build a community where these debates can happen openly, honestly, and respectfully. As we move toward the final sections of our analysis, keep in mind that the goal is not to reach a destination but to improve the way we travel. We are all on this journey of discovery, and the paths we take are as diverse as the people walking them. The important thing is that we remain engaged, that we keep questioning, and that we keep searching for the kind of justice that is worthy of our shared humanity. Finally, take a moment to consider how you would act if you were actually placed in one of these scenarios. It is easy to be a philosopher in a comfortable chair, but it is much harder to be one in the face of a real crisis. The true test of our principles is not how well we can argue them in a classroom, but how well we can hold on to them when the world is falling apart around us. This is the ultimate challenge of our lives, and it is why we must keep on studying, reflecting, and growing.